Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host and this week's guest, Jerry Gadori. That's me. Why only me this week? Very simply, at the time of this recording, summer is starting to wrap up, and we're moving into what, in the United States at least, is typically a massive hiring season. And as we roll into that time, vacations come to an end, people put a focus on work. I want to make sure that the listeners of this show are on track for how to really get the best talent that they need and that's on the market right now. I want to make sure that you're prepared to hire like an absolute master. So how do we escape the hiring swamp and make sure that we're prepped to go? Not complicated. We're going to hit 5 things that will separate you from your competitors. You do just these 5 things, none of them very complex. Heck, I can do it. Then you're going to be 3 steps ahead of the competition, and you're going to have first choice of the people that you need. So the first thing is this. You need to truly understand what you need and use that to create your job description and then go to market. So what do I mean by that? Number 1, what's the best vehicle for you to get the work you need done? Is it a contract person? Is it a full-time W-2 employee? Is it a consulting company? It could be any of those things. And make sure you're using the best vehicle for that time. If, for example, you have 3 months of work that need to get done, that's a contractor all day, every day. If, for example, you have a skilled requirement that takes a little bit of time over a long period, say, for example, you're a smaller firm and you've built up your company's IT infrastructure to the point where you really could use help with it, but you're not really ready for an employee yet, you don't have that much work, rather than have your nephew do it for you part-time, that's where an MSP or an MSSP would be ideal. A consultative contractual relationship with an organization like that can give you A-level support at a fraction of what it would cost you to hire somebody who you're really not ready for. So again, make sure that you're using the right vehicle to get the work done. My back in the napkin quick math is this. If I have more than 2 years of work on a full-time basis, I hire them W-2. If it's less than 2 years, but I believe based on my projections that it will grow past that, I hire W-2. If it's a temporary need for a specific skill, especially if it's not center wheelhouse for what my company needs, I use a contractor. If I need that person to have institutional knowledge of my organization and work potentially erratic hours over time, that's a consultant for me. So that's how I do it. But make sure you're using the right vehicle for you and your use case. Once you've got that, evaluate your needs and create a masterful job description. What does that mean? It's clear what the candidate needs to have in order to succeed in the role. It spells out their role and their responsibilities. It gives some guidance as to what their career path would be. And number 4, it's not a laundry list of every possible skill set this person will need over the next 20 years. It's what they need for this role. In addition to that, it's written in an attractive way. Nobody who has options is going to sit down and read a list of your hostage demands, masquerading as a job description, and take it seriously. So yes, it needs to have quantifiable skills, years of experience, educational levels, certifications, or whatever is relevant for this particular role, but it needs to be written in a way that's attractive to the candidate. Said differently, we need to take our requirements and write them from the perspective of what's in it for them. Now, once we have that done, we understand the best vehicle. We understand exactly what we truly need for this role. And we've written it up in an advertisement-worthy way, a marketing-approved job description, in other words, as it relates to planting that seed. We do the second thing on our 5-part list. We plant that job description in the right place. And we plant it everywhere we have a presence. Now, the first and most obvious answer to that question is, where does this candidate spend the most time? If you're a white-collar worker or a white-collar organization hiring white-collar workers, the answer is probably LinkedIn. most likely that's where you want to be. Should you pay to advertise it across places like Monster and Indeed and other specialized job boards? Maybe, but I would start with LinkedIn. You'd be very surprised how simply adding that job description to your company page and your hiring manager's personal LinkedIn profile, as well as your recruiters, will get you a significant number of candidates, especially if you've created a meaningful presence. Now, it's beyond the scope of this quick hit list of things to do before you go to market to get into employer branding here. But if you followed the show for any period of time, or if you've read my book, Destination Employer, you know my stance on creating an employer brand. If you've already done that, then you know where to put this. But the most important thing to remember is you want to put this, number one, in the place where your ideal candidate is most likely to see it. And number two, in any other places where you have a meaningful presence. Again, potentially including things like paid job postings, but not necessarily, especially if you do this early enough that you can afford the little bit of time it takes for something like this to get traction. Quick related tangent, LinkedIn is an incredible tool for recruiting, but it is slow as molasses. Why? Because while it might be the biggest business networking site in the world, the only people on it who check it compulsively are people who are actively looking for a job, salespeople, and narcissists. So if you're not out there building your brand because it's important to your business or looking for a job and you're spending a time on LinkedIn, might be something to talk to your therapist about. I say that in jest. So that's the second thing. The third part of this master list, this critical step to knock this out of the park, is to make sure your hiring processes, your interview phase, your offer phase are dialed in. What does that mean? Let me give you a very simple definition. Your hiring process should take the least amount of time that it can, that still allows you to fully qualify that candidate. The longer the hiring and offer process, said differently, the longer the time from a candidate's initial outreach or contact with your company as it relates to this job and yes or no, the less control you have over this candidacy. Many times I've seen companies lose awesome candidates because they took too much time to make a decision, to move people through the process. Now I say again, I'm not just suggesting for even a minute that you shortcut your qualification process. What I am saying is if this role is a priority to fill, you need to give it that real priority. Some tips that I've found are very helpful to achieve this. Number one, empower the most junior person who has the experience and the authority to make this decision to be this chief stakeholder in this. In other words, if you're hiring an entry-level help desk person for your company and you're a 100, 200 person company, your CIO shouldn't need to be a part of that interview process. Your help desk manager or your support manager or your IT manager should all be plenty senior enough. The higher level that you go, typically the longer it takes to make calendars align. The two things that you win by going junior is number one, again, typically more time. And number two, you're training that leader on how to make important decisions. So again, the lowest level that can competently accomplish this. That's the first tip. The second tip, if you have an internal recruiter or you're working with an outside recruiter, give that person a seat at the table and give them actionable, meaningful feedback on the candidates they're bringing you. It does no one any good for you to tell them that this candidate wasn't a match. They're not a team fit. That doesn't tell them anything. That only increases the likelihood that they give you the same bad candidate with a different name because you haven't told them where their candidates are falling short. The third part of making this move quickly is every person who is involved in this needs to understand that they are involved, that they're expected to prioritize their interviews and what specifically they're qualifying for. So you don't waste rounds of interviews with people asking the same questions or missing important things. So that's the third thing. One last tip on this before we move on to the next step is this: understand that that candidate is probably evaluating many, many, many different opportunities, probably many of them quite similar to yours. So expect that they've forgotten details as they move through. Secondly, the more they travel through your interview process, the closer they get to the offer stage, and certainly once they have the final interview and or get the offer, the more emotionally they'll be reacting because they become invested in this role. I say this to tell you, be extra mindful to be sharing consistent information with them, offering good feedback, and making sure that they understand next steps and keep those next steps as close as possible so that they don't have an outsized negative reaction to what they perceive to be a slight because they're emotionally invested and now they feel like you've put them on a shelf and you're not giving them information. That creates ill will that can not only cost you the offer, meaning they won't accept, or cause them to go on a LinkedIn tirade that will do your employer brand no favors. So fourth in our 5-step process here is this: onboard like a champ. So you've decided what vehicle makes the most sense for you. You created a masterful job description, planted that job description in the place your candidate most likely would be, and yay for you, they were there, you were right, and you brought them through a great, short, well-qualified interview process. You got them to offer, and congratulations, they accepted. Now we're at the onboarding. The onboarding is the chance that you've got, the one chance that you've got to make an incredible first impression. It's most likely the first time that they're going to interact with their manager as their manager and not an interviewer. So use that time. During the recruiting or interview phase, which again, it's beyond the context of this call or this podcast or this particular episode of this podcast to dig into this too deeply. But during the recruiting phase, the qualification phase, you should have learned what about this role is exciting to your candidate, what they hope to achieve in their career, how your company is a match for them, what they're looking to do in the next 3 years. And you want to take all that information and fold it into your onboarding. When that new hire goes through an onboarding that's clearly tailored for them, that feeds back the information you shared in the interview process and hiring process, it sends them the clear message that they're important, they're valued, and that all the things that recruiter told them weren't just selling them a bill of goods to get them to say yes. As a part of that critical fourth step, we also want to make sure to marry up the career plan that we started to work on for them to your employee review cycle. So how employee reviews work is going to vary based on company, based on the role, based on their seniority, and lots of other things. But whatever tempo you have, part of that session, every single session, should be their career development. Are they tracking what you described in the career plan you're creating for them based on the interview process and what they told you in their new hire orientation? By doing that, you're taking employee reviews, which most people loathe, and making them valuable because you're talking to them about them, which most people really like to talk about. So again, make sure you're using the information from your hiring process to make a truly tailored employee review, and then include the career plan in that to ensure it's focused on them. Now, we still clearly need to talk about the things they're achieving as it relates to their role. But if we add in the career planning piece, it really adds a whole nother level. Final piece, number 5, very, very simply. Anybody who's listened to the show for any length of time or read my book or been a client of mine knows that I rely heavily on the EFG leadership framework: engage, fulfill, grow. Anytime any person working with you feels heard and valued, has a personal mission and values that align with your company's, and is growing within their career, anytime those 3 things are in place, you're incentivizing that person to perform at a high level over an extended period of time. So we want to make sure in number 5 that EFG leadership piece is in play throughout this whole thing. From the very first interaction, we want that person to feel heard and valued. We want to ensure that our mission and values align with theirs, which creates fulfillment, the F. And then G, we want to make sure that they're growing in their career. My commitment to you is this: if you do these 5 things and the offer that you're making out there to candidates is competitive, not only will you have the ability to consistently hire the best talent out there, but they will perform at a high level for industry beating periods of time that will make other companies' retention a sad, sad story compared to your own. Those are my 5 tips to escape the swamp and to stand above your competitors in hiring. I hope you have an incredible hiring season. And if you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I leave it to you, which of the 3 I described earlier that best suits my own personality and makeup. And if you need some additional help, again, that's probably the best way to reach out to me. Or if you'd like, you can go to one of my websites, destinationemployer.co, where the online digital program to my book is housed, and there are links there that you can schedule a call with me. Have an amazing week. Keep being awesome. I look forward to seeing you on the next show.